Hello there, folks. How are you? I can see we have something of a gallery view, and you all look very healthy. It looks great to see you today. My name is Will Miller, Dr. Will Miller, and I've been a psychotherapist for 30 years with a broad spectrum of experiences. I began my career in New York City out of Columbia University while I was a stand-up comic at night, and then during the day I was a therapist first at a heroin clinic, and so I've worked in the area of addictions, along with all kinds of mood disorders, depression, anxiety across the chart. And I know that this is an extremely challenging time for everybody. And so what I want to do is, I know that all of you and everybody coping with this quarantine or semi-quarantine and the anxiety that it produces are looking for strategies, looking for ways to cope with this. Well, what I'd like to do that I think is perhaps different, and I'm going to ask you to go along with me, and in addition to having your own good, intelligent insights into what to do, I'm going to ask you to think like a shrink, because therapists look at this maybe stepped back a bit. What we're talking about here is what therapists call, the challenge here is the area of mood, like mood disorders. And the two mood disorders, or the two mood challenges, I should say, are the ones you know, anxiety and depression. Now let's talk about anxiety first, because I dare say that in this crisis, these are the calls I've been getting. A lot of people are really struggling with their anxiety. You may know this already. Anxiety was already an epidemic in the United States well before this crisis. Over 40 million Americans had a diagnosed anxiety disorder. That's just a diagnostic identity. Most of us have some level of that, of anxiety. Now, what is anxiety? Anxiety is basically, does this work? Your engine just continues to elevate and elevate. And those of you, or those people who've had extreme anxiety, it can spin up where you actually shut down with a panic attack, okay? So you conceptually understand what anxiety is. So here's what I want to do for the next, 20 minutes or so. And that is, first I want to talk to you about you. And then I wanted to talk to you about the others with whom you're sharing space, okay? So first you, then them, or other, and then we're going to talk about kids, okay? And the society, I guess, to finish it off. So let's talk about the anxious folks first. Anxiety is a really challenging difficulty, because you can't slow yourself down. It's your thoughts running amok. Let me give you some insight from psychology. I also work very actively, and have for the past 10 years, as the trauma specialist for first responders. I'm the PTSD authority. I'm a certified clinical trauma specialist for police officers, firefighters, EMTs, etc. People who routinely have exposure to traumatic experiences, soldiers, etc. But trauma, of course, goes across the whole spectrum. If you're in a car accident, any kind of a trauma. Let me tell you something about that first, okay? Because we're talking generically about stress, which is what I've been talking to companies about for years. Robert Sapolsky is a legendary neuroscientist from Stanford University. And Robert Sapolsky, I think you'll find this interesting, was the first person to theorize, and it's accepted, of course, that human beings, the human body, has amazing equipment organically to deal with acute stress, a fight or flight experience. You may have had that. You can imagine that with police officers, soldiers, etc. He said, but when we come down from that, there's very little physiological damage to the organism. Isn't that interesting? We are wired. It's like running from the lion. He wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Okay, the zebras are out there. They're very calm. Their blood is chill. All of a sudden, lion, brrr, they start running. Oh, they got Fred. Ah, too bad. And they calm right down, the blood tests show, with no damaging lingering, okay? We are very poorly designed physiologically to handle chronic stress. That's what does us in. And you know this, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, any kind of blood cooking disorder is really what compromises our health and ultimately takes many, many lives and all of the attendant challenges of that. So now I want you to think about that, chronic stress versus acute stress. What we are in now may have some acuteness, perhaps a little bit, if something goes awry in your house and in your quarantine, but we're talking about a classic case of a chronic stress because we don't know what the end game is, do we? And that may be the most difficult thing. Julian Rotter from the University of Connecticut is the psychologist who coined the term locus of control. I think you'll find this interesting. And he said that human beings really run across the spectrum where some of us are conditioned to have an external locus of control, meaning that we are really sort of at the mercy of powers and circumstances outside ourselves. Think about people we've been exposed to in the media over the past 10 years in horrible situations overseas, Syria, whatever. They have no illusion that they have internal locus of control. All they can control is like feeding themselves or just surviving. The American zeitgeist, our psychological makeup, internal locus of control. We are the task people, we're the power people, we are the can-do people, which is great. That's why we've done a lot of things, which works great until you don't have control. And then we become symptomatic. And anxiety is perhaps the premier principal illustration of this, is going into an anxiety state of some level, okay? That's just making your blood a little hotter. What can you do? Well, a lot of what we've learned in brain science through trauma specialty is pretty interesting. I want to tell you something. You know, the most useless part of your brain, right here, the frontal cortex. That's the noisy thing that's looking out and chattering all the time. That's what gets us into the most trouble. And I say that to give you a context. I'm sure many of you have heard, if you don't do this already, that meditation is a highly recommended strategy and practice for dealing with anxiety or mood difficulties. So some people here, and imagine me telling seasoned city cops, I think you ought to meditate. Well, they oftentimes roll their eyes because to them, they think that it's sort of packaged with some sort of Eastern religious or spiritual thing, which, okay. I said, no, you don't understand what this is. This is a practice that has profound psychological potency. And basically what it is a practice where you lose your thought and tell this part of your brain to shut its yapper, to stop thinking. So when you hear about meditation, and you can meditate by, for example, just closing your eyes in a quiet place and focus on your breathing very quietly, focus on your inhale and your exhale, or think about a word, one simple word or a sound. My wife and I do transcendental meditation for years, and that's simply that infamous mantra. It's just simply a sound that helps you to stop thinking. When you do that through breathing, for example, well, you'll find that intrusively some thoughts will come in. You start thinking about this or that. I think it's okay. Just go back to the breathing. The research shows, there's been great studies at MIT, Stanford, UCLA, that even short practices of some kind of a meditative, slow your cortex down of a day has an accumulating impact professionally. And it's pretty standard. It lowers your heart rate, lowers your blood pressure. And so by doing that over time, it will accumulate to have you find less triggers for your anxiety. Okay, so that's the anxiety thing. The other thing that's come out of trauma studies for all of us, whether it's anxiety or depression, is, in a word, they say movement. Okay. Once again, the kind of movement that research has shown with PTSD with soldiers is the movement that is almost like a signature recommendation is yoga. Once again, a practice that sometimes, many of you probably practice yoga and love yoga, but sometimes there's sort of this image about it, again, being a spiritual practice. Well, okay, it is. It's come from Eastern situations, but think about what yoga is. It's quieting, like almost a meditative state, and it's movement of your total body, not in a rigorous like weightlifting or all of that, which if you do that, that's great. But to add this to your exercise diet means that you're moving every single extremity, and you're doing it with stretching in a way that is challenging. But between meditation and movement, those are the two practices that are privately done that actually have an impact on lowering your anxiety. Now, to state the obvious, some people with anxiety who you're dealing with have been reliant on medication. I have a lot of patients over the years who have used medication very successfully. Those who demur from that, or even if with your anxiety, the medication's not helping, advocating for these practices has a lot of solid research affirmation. Now let's talk about depression, because those in your life who are depressed, and if it's you, This is the more challenging one because just like anxiety is whipping you up, depression is folding you in on yourself. It's losing yourself. It's pulling away. Now, I want to do something here. I want to talk to you as I am, and then I want to talk to you about the others who are in your life. A lot of us are stuck together, with a significant other or another intimate person. Maybe you're in isolation alone, and that's its own challenge. But for those of you, I get a lot of this as a marriage counselor, that, the tensions that are normally afoot in any kind of a marriage get exacerbated under these circumstances, if you haven't already found that out, okay? And a lot of that is because sometimes we need to really remind ourselves, this is my challenge. Again, let's go back. Maybe I'm having some anxiety. The person I'm with may have anxiety also, or depression. We need to step back, be kind and merciful to ourselves. Look, this is how I'm wired, and this is my challenge alone. And then to the other, to be able to say and speak with merciful compassion. This must be really hard for you the way you're wired. You know how everyone's wired. You know that if you're with it, I've gotten letters from people whose person in their house is depressed and they just want to sleep or just watch TV and not engage. Okay, to be able to initiate some conversation that says, I know this is really hard for you, and I see that your inclination is to really withdraw. How can I help you? How can we work together to have at least some surcease from this for you to come out and spend some time where you talk, okay? So being each other's, think like a shrink, each other's clinician is helpful. Now let's go to kids, because a lot of people, my wife's an elementary school principal. She just retired. And of course, it's not lost on me that how many people wonder, gee, I wonder what it would be like to be a stay-at-home school teacher. Well, ta-da, you're there. And it's been foisted upon you, and you're now a homeschool teacher. Now, you're all, as they say in Boston, wicked smart, and you know that you have to have a tactical, strategic approach to activities, to making it work. You know your kids, you love them, how they drive you crazy, how you adore them, etc. I was an ADHD kid myself, and so can you imagine that? But the fact of the matter is, the temperaments in the household, and you know what makes them symptomatic and what calms them down. And you'll use those strategies. But once again, one of the things that is recommended psychologically is, children, first of all, I was active as a therapist in New York City at 9/11. And of course, it was very vividly clear from the beginning that the counsel was any child under 6 years old, no media. They do not see, their brain does not process that this isn't happening again and again. And it was like lockdown, no exposure to young children to media images. It frightens them. They don't have reality testing the way an adult does. As kids get older, of course, they're tuned in and aware. Here's something that's, I think, good news right now. Right now, children, they have always had a sense of the heroism of some iconic cultural heroes, soldiers, police officers, firefighters. Now you can add nurses and doctors and medical staff. These are heroes and hero figures for your children. Getting them involved in something that advocates them having a sense of mission. Can you kind of imagine that? A sense of mission that they too would aspire to be a first responder, and to have them be involved in activities that affirm that, or talk about that, or show illustrations of it. All of this in the mix of the distracting media that you can provide for them. Obviously, I don't recommend a lot of media exposure for children or adults that are depicting catastrophic images. It's like, do you really need to go there? Something like a little bit tamer, more upbeat media exposure, but also interactivity like games. You'll Google this, and there's a flood of information about activities for children. The ingenious people who make these recommendations have all sorts of fabulous ideas. So now we talked about you, we've talked about your other, we've talked about the children, and the background for all of this is thinking like a shrink is to be compassionate and empathic, is to feel what the other person is feeling. And that's true as we look out to the broader situation, that Julian Rotter quote, we can't control the end game. We can only watch, pray, have good thoughts, send out good thoughts and get involved in some serving activities. I will tell you this, in human history, whenever a society has been shut down with a crisis and a catastrophe, it has always followed that there has been a regeneration of enthusiasm, expanse. In 1400, after the Black Plague, within a generation, the Renaissance started. I think we all are hoping for the better angels to come out for compassion. And that's what we love about the nurses and the first responders. They are embodying compassion. You want a lesson for yourself and for your kids? Let's come out of this committed to that. Okay, so I hope this is useful. I really love this format. I love live better, of course, but I also, I've been a professor at Purdue for a long time, and I've been around students and teaching the graduate school. I'm very comfortable in any kind of interactivity that can be designed, even through these windows, okay? So I hope this was helpful information. Remember, think like a shrink, compassion, empathy. You'll get there. Thank you.